Welcome to Mathematical Minutes with Dr. Rhonda Fitzgerald, where we strive to give you understanding to mathematical concepts in minutes. So today we want to talk about solving a quadratic equation using the zero factor property. Or we could say solving a quadratic by factoring. So let's look at an example. Let's start off with the quadratic x squared plus 5x is equal to 24. So we have a quadratic. It's not in standard form. So standard form would mean that this thing would equal 0, and it's not there yet. And in order to solve by factoring, that's how we want it. So we must have this equation set equal to 0 or put in standard form. So in order to do that, what we'll do is subtract over 24. Let's subtract over our 24. And when we subtract over 24, we end up with x squared plus 5x is minus 24, equals 0. So now this is put in standard form, or what we like to call general notation or standard form. Now, in order to solve by factoring, guess what we're going to do? We're going to factor this quadratic. So let's go ahead and factor this quadratic. And in factoring this, we see that this quadratic factors as x plus 8 and x minus 3. And so in order to solve this, though, using this zero factor property or by factoring, we need to set the two factors equal to 0. So my next step is to say x plus 8 equals 0 and x minus 3 equals 0 and solve the resulting equations. So when I solve this, we subtract 8 from both sides, and we end up with x is equal to a negative 8, and add 3, and we have x is equal to a positive 3. So my two solutions are x is equal to a negative 8, and a positive 3. Those are our two solutions, negative 8 and positive 3 for this quadratic. So in order to solve by factoring, first we needed to set the equation, make sure the quadratic is set equal to 0, so moving over all terms to one side and have it equal 0. Then we factor. So after we factor, we set the two pieces equal to 0 and solve from there. And so let's look at one additional example. Let's look at one additional example. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's look at one other case. In this case, so once again, we'll have a coefficient in the beginning, right? We'll have a coefficient in the front. So my next example that we want to look at is, all right, so my next example is 3x squared equals 4 minus 11x. So notice this one looks slightly different than the one before, but the concept still remains the same. We want to have all terms on one side and have it equal to 0. So once again, put this thing in standard form. So how do we do that? And it looks like the easiest move would be able to subtract the 3x over. That can work. However, I like to try to leave my leading coefficient to be positive. All right, I want my leading coefficient, right, the x squared, my leading coefficient to be positive. So in order to keep it positive, I'm going to move all the other terms over, meaning I'm going to subtract the 4 and add the 11x to the other side, right, to the other side. So when I do that, right, we want to subtract 4 and add 11x. All right, subtract 4 and add 11x. And when we do that, our resulting equation in standard form will look like 3x squared plus 11x. I want to move the 11x first, minus 4 equals 0. So now we have our equation in standard form. We moved everything over to one side, having our equation equal 0. So this is called standard form or general form, depending on whose terminology you're using. Okay, so now that we have it equal to 0, recall that our next step is to factor. So we want to factor this. And when we factor this, this becomes 3x minus 1 and x plus 4. So now our next step is to set our two factors equal to 0. So we have 3x minus 1 equals 0 and x plus 4 equals 0. And now we just want to solve the resulting equations. So here, if I add 1 to both sides, we have that 3x is equal to 1. Lastly, divide by 3. and we see that we have x is equal to a positive 1/3. And then lastly over here, if I subtract 4 from both sides, we end up with x is equal to a -4. So my two solutions are a positive 1/3 and -4. So this is solving a quadratic equation using the zero factor property, or we could generally just say solving a quadratic by factoring. Thank you.